Hi, I'm Drew Levanti, and welcome back to Elections Weekly, a show where we take a look at the week ahead through the lens of electional astrology. Thanks, everybody, so much for coming back again this week. These videos come out every Monday. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. You might notice that I'm in a little bit of a different location from usual. So I'm actually visiting my brother in California right now in the Bay Area, and I'm coming to you from his backyard. So bear with me through the slight difference in our normal way of doing things, but you know what? The astrology is basically the same everywhere. So we'll just hop into it with that. So our first chart for the week is going to be March 1st. And this chart is, we're still like in the new moon phase pretty much here. So this is like before the exact full moon in my location. And I believe everybody will have this before the new moon. So it's March 1st at 11:45 p.m. So really getting close to midnight there. And we see this midnight in the chart with the sun being on the IC, this being the darkest time of night. And so there is often a certain privacy with a chart like this. And we get that sense of privacy not only with the sun, the source of light being in the darkest place, but also with the phase of the moon. So the moon here getting very close to new. This is potentially a very healing election, something that has maybe needed to end for a while that can now end in as graceful a way as possible. One thing that comes to mind with this is like when it's time for pets to go. I just noticed in the chart that the ruler of the sixth house is Mars, and Mars is, or I should say, the ruler of the sixth sign in the chart is Mars, since the sixth sign is Aries, and Mars is conjunct a benefic. And so there can be support for pets. Say this chart is very supportive for letting go in general. Even though it's a fixed rising sign, which tends to not be so much about letting go. We have both of the luminaries, both the sun and the moon in Pisces, and Mars is very cadent in the chart. So the ruler of the ascendant is like in this position of releasing or relinquishing its control over matters. That's one of the things that happens in the third house. The third house is where we become alive to surroundings and when we can perceive things in our local world, because we're not so concerned with like gripping it so hard, we can actually notice things. And that's the sort of disposition that I am understanding this Mars through, where Mars is in the third house in this sort of local world, or in this space of communication, this space of dialogue, this back and forth. And it's with Venus. Mars is with Venus here. So the typical heat and aggression of Mars is tempered not only by the coldness of the night and the coldness of Capricorn, where Mars is, but also by the soothing touch of Venus. And so we see these planets, sort of near the end of Capricorn. And so this chart does have a sense of things being like later on in life, or like at the end of something, So there's many layers of this chart that speak to that theme of endings. Also noticing the Mercury-Saturn conjunction, which, in terms of communicating about endings, or speaking to limits, and acknowledging where words cannot cross here. We cannot communicate across this boundary anymore. We do it now and then it's over, something along those lines. So I hope that gives you some ideas for this chart. We can start looking at the next chart for the week, which is our Wednesday chart. And so this is going to be March 2nd. So on March 2nd, we have 6:20 p.m. So this is going to have about 20 degrees of Virgo rising. I should also mention that in the previous chart, if the moon is not yet in Pisces in your location at that 11:45 p.m. time, it's not as workable. You definitely want the moon in Pisces for that election. So if you have it different in your location, maybe just skip that one or consider it for yourself. So for this March 2nd chart, we're looking at 6:20 p.m., 20 degrees of Virgo rising, and we are now past the exact new moon, but the moon is still very much dark. It's still very much under the beams of the sun. So we're in this new phase, but it's still so new that it has not really taken off and grown yet. You know, when something is still a seed in the ground and it might have its first little jolt of nutrients, or the soil is giving it what it needs for the first time, we haven't seen anything spring from that seed yet, even under the earth. There's still some coming together that needs to happen at that very small level. And so this new moon, we see it in the 7th sign of the chart, pretty close to the descendant. So this can well describe a situation where, you know, there's some new beginning with relationships, but it's not clear yet exactly what that form will be. But it is quite hopeful. You know, it is ruled by Jupiter. And so whatever is beginning in terms of partnerships under this election, there's quite a bit of faith that it will end up going your way, or you have quite a bit of belief in your problem solving and like being able to do something to fix it. The reason that I was also attracted to this chart is that this is the night of the sun. So you'll notice here that this is just after sunset, the sun being just below that western horizon, just below that descendant. And Wednesday night is the night of the sun. So anytime during the first hour of night on Wednesday, you can connect with the sun in a particularly special way. And since this is a new moon on Wednesday night, with those planets, you know, just having set, it seems like a pretty nice time to consider what it means to be in a relationship and also be a self-contained individual, like kind of understanding or nourishing those connections across and those leaps between people that make relationships workable. Like we stretch, we imagine, we do these Piscean things to make relationships work. And I think that in a highly, you know, relational context that we're always in, sometimes the sun can be told that it doesn't want there, that it's not wanted in that space. And in my experience, the relationships that I find the most supportive are those that make me happy to light up, happy to be myself, or happy and comfortable to express myself and just be myself. And so this layering of the sun and the 7th house, or the luminaries and the 7th house on this night of the sun when Jupiter is with the sun, it feels like a good time to grow one's sense of independence and self-containment within a relationship. Yes, we can dream. Yes, we can stretch, and we can become a part of each other in really important ways. And we can maintain this sort of solar integrity of the relationship and within the relationship. And so those are some of the things that this chart makes me think of from a meditative or magical perspective. We can now move on to the chart for the 3rd. This is one of my favorites of probably the whole year, so super excited to share it. This is at 12:59 p.m. on Thursday, March 3rd. And so we're looking here for about 18 degrees of Cancer rising, but really the election time should be mapped to the midheaven. And so you want a Cancer rising and you want the midheaven to be very close to the moon. And so you can see in my location, got the moon at 26 Pisces, and at 28 Pisces is the midheaven. And so this works out pretty well. I've also made it so that it's the day and hour of Jupiter. I moved the time forward a little bit, like past the moon, just so that it could be the hour of Jupiter. And this is really nice because Jupiter is with the moon, ruling the moon. And so the amount of problem solving support or hope and optimism support that Jupiter can provide is really emphasized at this time, given that it's the day and hour of Jupiter. So this is a great chart for anything to do with the 9th house, especially as you are beginning something new in the 9th house. So if you've been kind of like waiting to take the plunge and call yourself an astrologer, this is a pretty good chart for that, because this moon has so much more to grow. There's so much to be learned and to be opened up in the world for you, and to consider the possibilities of something with the ninth house. And this is a ninth house that's going to expand and grow very well, and it's going to be assisted in its expansion and its growth by others, like by mentors and by other astrologers who are willing to sort of take you under their wing, if you will. And that is something that we get from the support of Jupiter in the ninth and ruling the ninth. We also see the conjunction of Mars and Venus here going into the seventh house. And so that's interesting from the perspective of this being potentially something to do with clients, or something to do with another party, somebody who you're working with, or anybody who you're in a contract with. This Mars-Venus conjunction is potentially volatile, but it is also showing some level of intensity and passion about the collaboration. Like, the collaboration is valued by the other party. We also have Pluto in this chart right there with Venus and Mars. And so that sense of, how balanced is the partnership, or say this is about clients, like, are energetic boundaries being navigated appropriately, like offering what you can actually offer, as opposed to, being asked to provide something that you're not capable of providing, and the sort of the power dynamics of that, and any other ways that power dynamics and holding something over somebody is something that comes to mind with Pluto for me. And I think that those are important things to keep in mind, to the extent that this is an election that you're using for some kind of partnership. Just being aware of how resources are being used, not only as resources themselves, but also as sometimes like control mechanisms, or like, I'll give you this if. So like, what are those conditions of support that you need to be aware of in order to kind of navigate? In terms of like the arc of the week, this election does find us comfortably after the exact new moon, and so we're now getting into the waxing phase of the moon. And so in terms of starting new things, now we're talking about elections where we can consider these for things that you're building up, as opposed to winding down. And any of the elections before this are more on the winding down side. Take a look at the chart for the 4th. We get a 10:35 a.m. time on Friday. And in my location, I'm shooting for the midheaven to be at 21 Aquarius, conjunct Mercury, while Mercury rules the Gemini ascendant. And so this is a really beautiful Mercury chart. Anything to do with writing, communication, anything where you're putting your words in the world, where you're using your words, using your language, using your imaginative language in order to make structures more apparent, to describe systems. So bringing in this element of Saturn here, where Saturn is in Aquarius in its own sign, and Mercury is very much being supported by Saturn to speak from a place of Saturnian understanding or Saturnian wisdom. And so the effect of Mercury in this chart is to translate Saturn, to bring Saturn forward. There's an idea in traditional astrology that Mercury is neither malefic nor benefic, but it takes on the qualities of what it's touching. And so what does it mean here for Mercury to be taking on the qualities of a very well-placed and dignified Saturn? It can be articulating boundaries. It can be naming what is not permissible. It can also be imagining what ought to be. Saturn is in Aquarius, it's in a fixed air sign. And so it's holding to an idea, holding to a particular view of the way that things should be, as well as the way that things are, and kind of bringing those two together. And so Mercury in this position in this chart is able to speak from that place and to those things. This does offer some support for casual connection, like casual enthusiastic connection with friends or within a community. And so we see this moon that may or may not be void in your location in the 11th house. And if it's not void, this still goes, but there's a certain amicability or a willingness to connect emotionally within a network of others or a community of people who maybe you haven't put yourself out there with quite to that extent yet. And with the moon in Aries, there's a certain, especially in this waxing phase, there's a real kind of opportunism with this moon, like a real sense of, yes, we can do it. All I have to do is, I'm not even going to think about it. I'm just going to put myself out there and see what happens. And so that Aries moon in the 11th house is a really good placement for, getting started in a community and just like freaking going for it. Like I'm thinking of some people right now actually who have this placement, and it's, you know there's a need for speed in terms of getting ingrained somewhere, and I think the moon can really get ingrained in a community in this chart, especially with like the longevity of Saturn playing a big role. And the ruler of the seventh house is this Jupiter in Pisces, its own sign, and it's really at that conjunction with the sun now. And so this is interesting in terms of describing a new beginning of partnerships, right? So like the resetting of Jupiter's cycle with the sun is like the new moon of Jupiter's cycle. And so that newness, that refreshing quality can be used for leaving impurities behind with relationships. And that can be a really, really useful thing. Like if you're trying to kind of hit the reset button in a certain way. However, in terms of the Jupiterian like support that you would get from others in this chart might actually be a little bit depleted, because this conjunction with the sun is so exhausting for Jupiter. Like, that heat and that overwhelming intensity of the sun can be exhausting for a planet. And so even though it's the Cazimi, which people often understand as good, it's still tiring for Jupiter. And so it's better for that energy of like letting something go or like leaving impurities behind and starting fresh in terms of partnerships or clients or any of these seventh house things, as opposed to starting and like really looking for a lot of support from that place. The next chart is going to be the 5th, and we're looking here at Saturday, March 5th at 10:35 a.m. So we have once again a Gemini rising. This chart is quite lovely, I think, because of the moon. So you might say, well, Drew, the moon's in the same exact place that it was last time, so what's the big deal? Well, it is a little bit further in Aries. And so from this degree of Aries, we have the moon actually moving into an aspect with Mercury by sextile. And this is super cool because Mercury rules the chart, it rules the ascendant. So it's the planet that we were choosing to embody with this election. And so with the moon bringing the light of a sextile, this waxing moon is carrying something toward Mercury that it needs to know. The moon is, sort of the OG messenger. Like before Mercury was the messenger, the moon was the messenger because it goes so fast, it can carry so many things. And so the moon is making this contact to Mercury, and what it's bringing for Mercury is the light of Saturn. So the moon just came from an aspect with Saturn. Now it's just going to an aspect with Mercury. And so this moon is facilitating a connection between Saturn and Mercury. And so everything that I said about naming structures or articulating boundaries, all of those things are really useful here. And I think that there's something about Mercury that can bring a little bit of flexibility to Saturn. Mercury is typically a very, very flexible planet in the sense that you can imagine a fly buzzing around and it's here and it's there. Or maybe to make it a little bit more pleasing, we can imagine like a hummingbird darting around. And that is like the speed and the velocity of Mercury. And so Saturn can help Mercury slow down where it needs to, but Mercury can also help Saturn speed up a little bit, or um, think think ahead, or think on its feet. It's going to make it a little bit more flexible. And so what I like to see with this moon connecting Mercury and Saturn is that there's a flexibility and a warmth to this Mercury Saturn conjunction, that even if you're doing something that is more cold or more kind of calculating, there's a certain level of vivaciousness that this Aries moon is bringing to that conjunction. And so it can be something that is a little bit more like lifting the spirits, even if it's being articulated in a cold or Saturnian way. There's a nice kind of balancing there that the moon in Aries is able to give the otherwise very cold quality of Saturn that is dominant in this chart. And we are going to move on now to the 6th. And the 6th, we're looking at Sunday, 6:22 a.m. We're looking for a sunrise chart. So this is the day and hour of the sun. You know it's the hour of the sun because it's Sunday and the sun's rising. So this is potentially a very nice solar election where the sun is being supported by Jupiter. Now, the sun doesn't have any essential dignity here, but it is being supported by Jupiter. So this is potentially a sun petition, asking for support in terms of career, reputation, prominence, visibility, and in the register of Jupiter. So those qualities, those leadership qualities, those standing out qualities in terms of religion, philosophy, foreign places, the esoteric, all of these Jupiter and Piscean qualities. And this election is one that does have some complications with the moon. And the moon, the reason I say that is because the moon is in my location at 2 degrees of Taurus, which is its single degree of exaltation. But the moon is also being overcome by Mars and Saturn and Venus from Aquarius in the 12th house of this chart. And so this whole day, when the moon's in Taurus, this is a thing that I see a lot of people like starting out with elections. They'll start to be like, oh, let me just do something when the moon's in Taurus. But it really depends on the aspects of the moon in Taurus. Like, yes, it's exalted, but you really do have to look at everything. And in this chart, both malefics are in Aquarius. So maybe the moon in Taurus is not like the optimal lunar thing that you think it is, especially given that Uranus and the node are also in Taurus. So all of that to say, this moon is cool, but it's not that cool. So maybe focus on this one for solar devotion, or some kind of light solar petition, or a petition to the sun for clarity of vision, clarity of purpose, clarity of a path. The sun lights the way, and Jupiter is also very much about the way. So the support of Jupiter for the sun definitely lends itself to that kind of thing. So our chart for March 7th is kind of a choose your own adventure story, because the moon is, depending on your location, it's going to be doing something different at different times. And this is really important here. And so in this case, I can show you sort of like almost like a walkthrough of why I can't really give everybody the same chart here. So I'll just go ahead and share. And you can see here in my location, or I should say in Chicago, where I usually am, but I'm not today, that the moon in this chart at sunrise is at 14 degrees of Taurus. And so that's really nice, because the moon's next aspect is going to be to Jupiter. And that's what we can do on this day. But let's say this chart were in Paris. When I put it in Paris, just the same time, we'll do a sunrise chart again. And in Paris, We see the moon is at 11 degrees of Taurus, and so its next aspect is it's still to Jupiter, but it's like earlier in the sign, right? So you see that when we went east, the moon went backward in time or backward in the zodiac, and when we go west, so like if I go to Honolulu, somewhere super far in the other direction, now the moon is going to be separating from the sun at this time. And so this election is going to put a lot more emphasis on Saturn because that's the moon's next aspect. And so if you were like in Hawaii, for example, I would probably recommend a chart that's like earlier, so that you can still get the application, the applying aspect to Jupiter. So the Pisces rising in most locations is going to work really well on this day. And it is the moon's day. The moon is exalted in Taurus. But the typical sort of abundance and groundedness of the Taurus moon in this particular time window where Mars and Saturn are in Aquarius is going to be a little bit more strained. It's going to feel like resources might be running out, or it might feel like a test to our solidity. Like things in the earth are moving. The earth is moving beneath our feet, and how that changes things, how that changes our relationship to resources when we're sort of, yeah, it's a tricky moon transit. Let's just put it that way. And so these couple days when the moon is in Taurus are like uncharacteristically difficult. And so Sunday and Monday, I would still go with the Pisces rising because it's like, okay, we're relying on Jupiter here, and we're relying on that Jupiterian form of support, while everything else is kind of like fixed chaos. We're going to lean mutable in when there's fixed chaos. And so hopefully this gives you a little bit of a window into like a selection process where, who are we asking for support at this moment? Well, probably not actually going to be the moon, even though the moon's exalted. So thanks everybody for joining on this week of Elections Weekly. I will be back again next week, also from California. It's kind of like an extended trip. I don't know where I'm going to be filming from, maybe somewhere cool. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you next week.